Anisha Mathur, Kamaljeet Sandhu and also Ashraf Wani continue to be with us. Let's take a quick point from first Kamaljeet Sandhu, because you're in Jammu region right now, Kamaljeet. What is the mood like? There was a lot of support that had come in from the people of Jammu who believe that they will now get a chance and hope to be represented, that the schemes will come for them also. What are they expecting today?
Pooja, I'm standing at Raghunath Bazaar in front of the famous Raghunath Mandir, and we have with us not just the locals but also the tourists, several of them who've come from Gujarat. But here's the perspective that we want to get, not just from the locals but also from people who've been coming to the state very regularly, now a union territory. आप लोग कह रहे हैं आप लोग पिछले 14-15 सालों से आ रहे हैं, अब जब अनुच्छेद 370 हटाया गया, क्या आपको लग रहा है, क्या बदलाव है?
नहीं, बदलाव में मतलब काफी डेवलपमेंट वगैरह भी देख रहे हैं हम यहाँ पर, और जो लोग भी हैं वो फ्री, मतलब पहले से जो फ्री हो रहे हैं, मतलब काफी मतलब बदलाव लोगों में भी है, और पैनिक नहीं है, जो पैनिक जो होना चाहिए वो इतना पैनिक हम नहीं।
Getting a perspective from somebody else from Gujarat, आप 22 साल से आ रहे हैं।
Yeah, we are coming from 22 years and we have seen the tremendous change here. और काफी मतलब अब बदलाव ऐसा है कि आप यहाँ जाइए, श्रीनगर जाइए, वैष्णो देवी जाइए, रोड्स काफी हो गए और बिजनेसमैन इतने खुश है, जा रहे सारे दुकान वाले।
वर्डिक्ट पे भी आप कुछ बोल रहे हैं?
हम तो बोल रहे हैं कि ये काफी जल्दी होना चाहिए था, काफी लेट हुआ है, और जल्दी होता तो आज डेवलपमेंट काफी जल्दी होता, इन्वेस्टमेंट काफी आता, हम वही सोच रहे। और क्यों
लेट्स गेट अ पर्सपेक्टिव, अ लोकल पर्सपेक्टिव। आप ये बताइए, आज सुप्रीम कोर्ट में इतने सारे पिटिशंस हैं, आज वर्डिक्ट आने वाला है, पर एक लोकल पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से आपको लग रहा है कि कई बार जम्मू वाले बोलते थे कि डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है, जम्मू को नहीं देखा जाता है, आपके लिए क्या चेंज आया है?
आज अगर देखा जाए तो कश्मीर में जो अलगाववाद, उग्रवाद और पत्थरबाजी जो खत्म हुई है, वो सबसे बड़ी बात है। जम्मू कश्मीर के लिए नहीं, पूरे भारतवर्ष के लिए वो बड़ी बात है। और जो डेवलपमेंट आज हो रही है जम्मू कश्मीर में, वो सबके लिए हो रही है। उसमें कोई हिंदू के लिए, कोई मुसलमान के लिए नहीं, सब उस रोड पर चलेंगे। जो लोग बांटने की कोशिश करते थे उनके मुंह पे तमाचा है ये, जो दफा 370 टूटी है। और आज जो फैसला आने वाला है वो हमारे लिए बहुत अच्छा फैसला आएगा, हम स्वागत करते हैं।
So Pooja, let me tell you, there was a gentleman here, he is not there, but in one of the shops, a Punjabi person, he is from Punjab, but the business is here, and he said he's not a domicile, but he said he would strongly consider it now that the doors have been opened, simply because people from J&K could always buy property outside, and now the doors have opened so that they can have not just businesses here, but also property here, and also be a domicile here. But yes, a valid hues of perspective right here, right from the tourists to the locals, and yes, a majority backing the abrogation of Article 370.
Kamaljeet is getting us from the local residents, from the tourists as well, and the changes they are witnessing. Stay on with me, Kamal, because I want to go across to Kashmir Valley. That's where the big focus will be. That's where we saw a lot of terror incidents that have come down, but the impact of Article 370 abrogation will largely be seen and has been seen in Kashmir Valley. Ashraf Wani continues to be with us. Ashraf, have some measures, precautionary measures have been taken to ensure rumour mongering doesn't take place. What do you think is the sentiment on the ground today in the Kashmir Valley?
Pooja, basically the eyes are on this verdict of Supreme Court. It is a historical verdict by the Supreme Court, because all hopes of the political parties, mainly in the Jammu and Kashmir, are on this verdict. They were hopeful that probably something good news will come from the Supreme Court, because for last 4 years these political parties are only politicizing the abrogation of Article 370 in the Jammu and Kashmir. They are not in any government. There were no collections. So the political parties are much frustrated across the Jammu and Kashmir, particularly the regional political parties, and that is why they are looking on this verdict of Supreme Court. As far as the common people are concerned, they have equally interest in this verdict, because there was too much proceeding in the Supreme Court and the arguments what the people here in the Kashmir Valley believe. You know, on the 5th of August 2019, there was a long clampdown across the Kashmir Valley after the abrogation of Article 370. Somehow the government of India managed to calm the situation during that period, and lot of things had changed during last 4 years. We are seeing the pace of development in the Kashmir Valley as well as the flow of tourists increasing, but somehow the abrogation of Article 370 was something very close to the people of Valley. That is why they are still hopeful. And as you mentioned, that the precautionary arrangements had been taken by the authorities in the Jammu and Kashmir as well as by the security agencies, because they did not want any kind of disturbance in the prevailing peace here in the Kashmir Valley. That is why the security forces had been put on high alert. In fact, the convoy movement on Monday had been suspended, and also if after the verdict there will be some kind of verdict from the Supreme Court which can create any kind of trouble, the security forces are ready to tackle that, and police also. In fact, we are getting some inputs that probably there will be the speed of internet which will be lowered or suspended for some period, but that only depends on the verdict and what will be the response from the public here in the Kashmir.
To ensure that any sort of violence and law and order situation does not prevail. And it has been quite remarkable, at least when Article 370 was abrogation was announced, that there was no massive violence or bloodshed that was usually expected in the Kashmir Valley happened. And that's the kind of arrangement that was made. And we hope that eventually it's peace and people's welfare that will be in consideration for both Jammu and Kashmir. Ashraf Wani, Kamaljeet Sandhu, I appreciate you joining us with the voices. But let's now go across to the big questions that the Supreme Court bench will face. Who can revoke Article 370 as Constituent Assembly no longer there? It ceased to exist after 1957, and thereby those petitioners say, the Article 370 was permanent, to which the Parliament and the government at the centre said, no, it did not become permanent. It was never meant to be. Now, was the consent of the elected assembly needed at that time? Elected assembly, that of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So these are something that some questions that the court will want to elaborate upon. How did temporary Article 370 come to be permanent? This is going to be the sole focus. The government at the centre says it was never meant to be permanent. Those netas based in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Kashmir Valley specifically, say it had become permanent. It cannot be taken away. Can a state be turned into a union territory? Remember, all of these questions, in a manner in which, with the Supreme Court verdict is announced today, may have repercussions for further decisions ahead with regard to other states. Who represents will of the people? Whether it is the Parliament that is about the whole country, or whether it is simply about the elected assembly or the Constituent Assembly of 1957. And the bigger question will be, did Article 35A with regard to the permanent residents of the Jammu and Kashmir state breach equality? Was it biased against women? It refers to women because of the inheritance property rights and the whole point that if the women in Jammu and Kashmir married an outsider, they would lose inheritance rights to be given to the children. That, of course, stands cancelled now with the removal of Article 35A. So these are some of the questions that are raised. But eventually, it will be about what the people of Jammu and Kashmir have to say. So here's a report on what are some of the residents saying.
स्कीम ऑफ थिंग्स में डाउनग्रेड करना जरूरी था. जो कश्मीर के हालात थे और जो कश्मीर के 4 सालों में कंट्रोल किया है, ये इसी का कारण है कि जो उन्होंने इसको यूटी बनाया और सारा कंट्रोल सेंटर ने और एमएन ने रखा. अदरवाइज ये जो मिलिटेंसी वहाँ 30 साल से चल रही थी, हमने भुगती है. वी वर पार्ट ऑफ दैट गवर्नमेंट के उस समय हैंडल करते थे. कितना पावरफुल और कितना ड्रेडफुल था वो सिस्टम.
आर्टिकल 370 को उन्होंने जैसे भी हटाया है, इट वाज अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट जॉब. And what has been happening here was the terrorism was increasing day by day, and this stone pelleting and everything. Suddenly, one day when we saw that there was so much of a shift of the army to Srinagar, I think something is going to happen. And this was the real step taken by the government. And it had to cool down, and it is now, after 4 years, we are seeing things are improving.
So while the legal angles will be analysed by the Supreme Court verdict and the bench that is headed by the most experienced judges of the top court of this country, but on ground, it has to be accepted and agreed and acknowledged that there have been changes that have taken place and for the better, specifically in the Kashmir Valley. But what have been the changes after the Article 370 purge? Let's take a look at some of them. Property and inheritance rights to women marrying outsiders. This was Article 35 also specifically, that if the women married who was not a resident of Jammu and Kashmir, they would lose the inheritance property rights to be given to the children. So that stands cancelled. The women get as much rights as men in Jammu and Kashmir. Now ended the separate Jammu and Kashmir flag and the constitution. Now clearly it is the constitution of the country that is as much enabled and will be implemented for Jammu and Kashmir too. And that is the tricolour only that will be flying atop the secretariat, for example, of J&K. Now other angles also, remember the changes that we have witnessed in the past 4 years allowed any Indian to buy a property in Jammu and Kashmir, similar to how a resident of Jammu and Kashmir, a Kashmiri, could buy a property in rest of the country. Now any other Indian, or as has been across the norm across this country. Let's take a look at other changes also that have been brought in after the purge. Ended the separate penal code for Jammu and Kashmir. So there was a Ranveer penal code earlier in Jammu and Kashmir, whether it similar to how, let's say, the IPC is. Now it is the IPC that stands for all cases in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, automatic application of central laws to Jammu and Kashmir. This was significant. A lot of schemes and laws that were otherwise benefiting the citizens of the rest of the country in India were not applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. Specifically, for example, when it came to Valmiki Dalits who had come and lived in the Jammu region, they couldn't take a lot of benefits of that. They are now accessible to those benefits too. Gave equal rights to OBCs, Dalits and tribals. Remember, for Jammu and Kashmir, there were some specific laws with permanent residents, with permanent schemes that were available and accessible to them. Now it is how it is applicable to other castes and other tribes, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes that were applicable to others in the rest of the country will now be applicable to Jammu and Kashmir as well. Let's go across and listen in to Home Minister Amit Shah's reaction on Article 370 when it was abrogated and the reasoning that was given and the changes that we have witnessed.
मान्यवर, मैं उनको जवाब देना चाहता हूं, जब आर्टिकल 370 गया उसके पहले जीएसडीपी 1 लाख करोड़ था, सिर्फ 1 लाख करोड़, आज 2,27,927 करोड़ जीएसडीपी, सिर्फ 5 साल में डबल। रोजगारी ढेर सारी बढ़ी। पहले 94 डिग्री कॉलेज थे मसूदी साहब, अब 147 हो गई। आईआईटी, आईआईएम और 2 एम्स, सबसे पहला राज्य ऐसा है जहां 2 एम्स दिए गए, वो हमारा जम्मू कश्मीर। 367 पीजी की सीटें थी, उसमें नई 397 सीटें जोड़ने का काम नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार ने किया है और लगभग मिड डे मील 6 लाख लोगों को मिलता था, अब 9,13,000 लोगों को मान्यवर मिड डे मील मिलता है। प्रधानमंत्री ग्राम सड़क योजना की एवरेज 158 किलोमीटर थी, अब 8,068 किलोमीटर प्रति साल हो गई। क्या हुआ है जो पूछते हैं, इनको मैं बताता हूं। मान्यवर, स्मार्ट सिटी मिशन पहले था ही नहीं, अब 173 काम हुए हैं। प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना में 70 साल में 24,000 घर दिए गए थे, ये 5 साल में 1,45,000 लोगों को घर देने का काम नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार का। 75 साल में 4 पीढ़ियों ने 7,82,000 लोगों को पीने का पानी पहुंचा चुके थे, अब नए 13 लाख परिवारों को पीने का पानी पहुंचाने का काम नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार ने किया। मान्यवर, शिशु मृत्यु दर 22 थी, वो कम होकर 14.30 पर लाने का काम नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार ने किया है और लगभग 47 जन औषधि केंद्र थे, इसकी जगह 227 जन औषधि केंद्रों पर आज सस्ती दवाइयां वहां पर 5 साल में मिल रही है। मान्यवर, स्पोर्ट्स में युवाओं की भागीदारी 2 लाख से बढ़कर 60 लाख तक पहुंची है, क्योंकि अब खेल हो सकते हैं। मान्यवर, पेंशन के लाभार्थी में 6 लाख से 10 लाख तक पहुंचे हैं। ये सारा परिवर्तन केवल और केवल नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार ने आर्टिकल 370 जाने के बाद किया है।
So while remember, Union Home Minister Amit Shah giving details of the positive changes that have done specifically in the drop of terror incidents and stone pelting and mass violence that was usually earlier the norm, was a common daily affair in sometimes in the Kashmir Valley. With the changes, however, that he has announced, petitioners who have opposed the abrogation of Article 370 have stated that this was fraud. This cannot be done. This was unconstitutional, the manner in which it was revealed.